Jessica, are there any laws in place to protect children with special needs from being moved from school to school? Keeps changing the program seemingly to suit the county's lack of certified staff. Accommodates some obviously disinterested administrators from having to work. Well, yeah, I mean, you have the least restrictive environment rule, all right? And the least restrictive environment rule, it says that, you know, the presumption should be that they can educate your child in their home school and in the general education environment to the maximum extent appropriate. That's always a presumption, okay? And then they would need to provide a justification on why they can't do that. Now, you did not tell me in your question what the nature of your child's disability is. So therefore, you know, I can tell you that with the advent of No Child Left Behind and now Every Student Succeeds Act, that's really what's going on. And I'm going to sit there and tell you that that's what I think is happening. But what the law does allow as far as special education is they do allow for low incident or low occurring disabilities to concentrate services. All right. So this is where some schools are really abusing that allowance to where they're creating specialized programs for just about everything. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the disability in which they're creating the specialized units for are actually low incident or low occurring disabilities. I got into it with a special ed director years ago where she actually testified that autism in her school district was a low incident or low occurring disability. Now, nationally, it was not, but how she was interpreting it was that within her district, and she had her numbers, the number of kids, the highest number of a disability category that she was serving was speech language impairment and specific learning disability, OHI, and autism, which was my client, was down on the list. So therefore she declared that low incident or low occurring disability. Now, quite frankly, because of this particular district, I think far more of those children had autism, but she was not classifying them under autism. She was classifying them under specific learning disability, OHI or SLI, in order to justify having these specialized units. Now, what would be the benefit for the school system to create specialized units? Well, because special education is a subgroup when it comes to the high stakes testing that every state is obsessed with. Because of No Child Left Behind and now because of Every Student Succeeds Act, okay? So you have this high stakes testing that's done, and the federal government loves to track people, so they track 4 subgroups. They track special education, Hispanics, poverty, African American. These 4 subgroups. Now, every school wants to have a passing school, right? Passing schools are now attached to our real estate market. So now this nonsense of high stakes testing is intermeshed and interwoven into the very fabric of our capitalist system to where, nobody wants to move into a failing school. So they're tied together. So there's high motivation for a school system to have passing schools. Well, depending on the demographic makeup of their school system, they may have, apartments, places, that are more impoverished than others, all within each little school. And how schools want to protect themselves is they end up gerrymandering these boundaries to carve out these 4 subgroups, okay? Now, special education crosses all ethnicities, crosses all races, crosses all income levels. So special education tends to be an outlier, but you have Hispanic, poverty level, African American, and what they try to do, depending on which one is the higher concentration, because if you have a percentage over the allowance, whatever the mathematical figure is that the feds put out, and I can't remember off the top of my head, every Student Succeeds Act, which replaced No Child Left Behind under the Obama years, that was one of their big arguments, was what was going to be the threshold within the subgroup, because they allow the score of the subgroup not to be counted as long as it didn't go over a certain number. So as long as they could keep the number of African Americans inside of a particular school below whatever that given threshold was, then their scores did not count against the total of the same thing with Hispanic, same thing with special education, same thing with poverty. But the reality is that you're not going to have those. It just doesn't fit into your nice little percentage box. And so what ends up happening is if you end up over that threshold, then it becomes a high motivation, because, the reason that we track these subgroups is that they don't do as well on high stakes testing as the other populations. So once they're over that threshold, their total score would bring the school score down. So what the schools are now motivated to do is carve out failing schools to where they concentrate it heavily with one or all of the subgroups. Now you sit there and you go, well, how do they do that with special education? Because it's an outlier that crosses racial, religion, economic, and ethnicity boundaries. Well, very easily. You create specialized programs, and you put those specialized programs and you take them out of the home school, let's say that you guys are in, and you plop them over here in a school that you know is going to be failing because it has one or more of a high concentration of the other subgroups. Or if you have a standalone special education school, then, there's your answer on that. That tends to be why they do that. And if they sit there and they float these programs every couple years, then I would do a little back investigation to sit there and wonder, or investigate as to whether or not there's any legitimacy in your particular school district to what I'm saying. Are they concentrating those programs in the schools that are failing or close to failing or in need of support? That tends to be the high motivator, superseding everything else that you're talking about. The other thing is if you're in a rural county, then they're going to sit there and try to maximize bus routes. So, they'll cordon, it's called a hub and spoke system, okay? You got a bunch of spokes that feed into the hub. And, so they make these administrative decisions based upon bus routes, how much gas they'd save by not having to sit there and transport kids here and there and hither and fro. So, they're not taking your child into consideration. Now, how can you get around that? Yeah, you make the least restrictive environment argument depending on the nature of your child's needs, and I don't know how, what the nature or the severity of your child's disability is. So, you may write a response and I may sit there and go, well, yeah, in that particular situation, they're justified. Let's say your child needs a full-time nurse. And, in those particular situations, they don't necessarily have to have one at every school. And they are allowed under those situations, if it's a low occurring or low incident disability, to get away with doing something like that. But if it's something like autism, then there's a requirement for the school, if the costs are not exorbitant, to provide those services as close to the child's home school as possible, if not at the home school. I know that you guys don't want to threaten a lawsuit, and I wouldn't. It's not. I know what you're saying. As far as using the word lawsuit, but this area of law, it's not that kind of law. So advocacy, it would be a complaint, and I would use the right vernacular And I know I know you probably just wrote that, but I'm just saying, using the right vernacular, lawsuit has a different connotation or interpretation in the minds of people than a complaint. You're an advocate for your child. You are disagreeing with the placement decision, their concentration of services. That's the avenue in which you need to concentrate in order to negotiate, to work through that. I know I probably blew your mind with this whole ESSA, concentrating the services and the subgroups, but these are very, very real factors that parents do not have an education about and do not understand, that have very, very, very real and ongoing consequences for our kids, because principals, superintendents, and boards of education want to look like heroes as well. And this insanity that we got ourselves into with regards to high stakes testing, and shackled to these multinational corporations that are in charge of selling us, their snake oil in the form of all of these nonsensical high stakes tests. That's what they're chasing. They're chasing the score. They're chasing their reputation. They're chasing their good marks, and it has nothing to do with our children over here. And so the part where you said that it's extremely insulting to the children, I'm with you. That's what we fight. But I'd like to get more information to see whether I'm on the right, wavelength with you guys in what you're talking about. And if you're comfortable, then yeah, let me know what the nature of your child's needs are, and I could sit there and tell you whether or not I'm right on their allowance to create a specialized program, or whether they're just doing it to remove your child artificially in order to protect their school score at your home school. Okay? Good question though.